We hope you're all able to get through and enjoy this delicious breakfast this morning. My name is Terry Martin, and I am the 2013 chair of the Local First Alliance Steering Committee. And I'm also a commercial lender for Mascoma Savings Bank, who is co-sponsor of this morning's program, along with the Hanover Consumer Cooperative Society, fondly known to most of us as the Co-op. But more from the Co-op in about 2.5 minutes. Before I go further, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence for those who died and those who were injured in yesterday's horrific attack against an American institution, the Boston Marathon. Thank you. Members of the steering committee and I thank all of you for making the local economy a high priority. We expect that as you leave this room today, you will have renewed energy to continue to make this Upper Valley the best place to work and live in all of New England. Those of you that were born here, many of you know how good it really is. Those of us fortunate to come here to live and work will tell you how much better it is than from that which we came. A sincere thank you to a couple of folks. First, Terry Appleby, who cannot be here today. He is attending to some important business in the Midwest. But as general manager of the Co-op for over 20 years, Terry's connectivity with Philadelphia from his days there at St. Joe's prompted him to reach out to this morning's speaker. Terry could not be with us, but has been a supporter in the most inspirational way behind the Local First Alliance. He listened to Richard Schramm of Woods. I think Richard is here today. Richard, are you wave? Yes. And invited Michael Schumann to town nearly 5.5 years ago. Local First Alliance was born from that gestation. Today at Local First Alliance, we focus on the community and we focus on its most important resource, their local merchants, vendors, and producers. And I work for one of those. Mascoma Savings Bank was born 114 years ago and is the product of a local community bound together with a mutual purpose to provide exceptional customer service while improving the lives of the customers and the community. We strive to be a part of that community by participating in civic affairs, donating to deserving community groups and activities, and it's what we call community banking. We're now at $1 billion in assets. You wouldn't think a local company could be that big. Mascoma can serve the needs of nearly every local business in the Upper Valley with services ranging from traditional loans and deposits we all know about to cash management services and a full line of investment services and insurance services and even travel services with Platinum Passport Club that is to be unequaled. So my local business provides personal banking, home mortgages, business banking, wealth management, and you can find a deep bench of professionals ready to help you at any time. We are driven by a determined need to serve the community. Our profits allow us to donate over $1 million a year to worthy causes here in the Upper Valley. As our president, Steve Christie, says, a thriving local community is the key to our continued success. I asked a question about what the metric was to measure what success was here in the Valley. I continue to ask that question, but I have a partial answer. Let's all look back for the last 5 years and see how well we did. Our unemployment rate did not go to the national high. Our recovery has engaged earlier and stronger than the national average. And so our metric of a local economy that does well is is one that continues to do well. Now, a couple more folks to thank before I cede the program to Alan Sheets. Jeannie Brash and Emily Wood, would you wave your hand? I see Jeannie standing. Emily I would like to have us all thank those two women for their tremendous attention to detail. Most importantly, and you will hear from her later, Mary Margaret Sloan, our Executive Director of Vital Communities and our Program Executive, and Jake Blum, who has reached deep now for 5 years as a small business enterprise supporting the Local First Alliance and serving with pride on its steering committee. Thank you in particular, Jake. I also want to recognize the steering committee members of the past, Richard Schramm and Rob Schultz, Eliza Bernard, Joanna Wickham, to name a few, but the current members, Alan Reitz, Jake Blum from System Plus, Jeannie Brash, who we've just recognized from the co-op, Hal DeBono. Hal, wave your hand. There he is. WWNE, Fred Wainwright. Fred serves us from the Ledyard National Bank. Steve Taylor. Steve, are you around? Steve is from Taylor Farms. Dean Cashman, I saw Dean here this morning. Thank you very much, Dean from Lake Sunapee Bank. Mundy Wilson from Chippers. Mundy, did you make it this morning? Yeah, oh, good. Representative President and Joan Goldstein from the Small Business Development Center. Thank you so much. Alan, are you ready to take over here? I have expired my 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Terry. The community is stronger for your work. We really appreciate what you do. On behalf of Co-op General Manager Terry Appleby, I too want to thank you and welcome you to this morning's breakfast. This is a meeting of ideas, energy, and connection. Some of you were here 5 years ago in this room. We had author Michael Schumann join us for a business breakfast much like this. Michael is the author of The Small Mart Revolution, also an economist. And it was a great meeting that really spurred a lot of energy and ideas from that April event. Co-op board member at the time, Richard Tran, had the notion of inviting Mr. Schumann to the Upper Valley, and Terry Appleby quickly latched onto the idea. If you know these gentlemen, you can understand why we had no difficulty in finding people who were willing to help us found Local First Alliance. Richard also, again, served on our steering committee, and it was that kind of energy that motivated all of us. At the co-op, we've been around for 77 years, founded in 1936 by local consumers, 17 families. And my favorite part of their founding meeting was in their minutes where it stated, "The organization shall strive to buy from local merchants as much as possible and avoid price wars and local strife." And we have remained committed to that because of the course they set us on. Since that initial breakfast back in 2008, we've become a program of Vital Communities. Our steering committee's been meeting monthly to manage a small but growing budget. We've sought to educate people around the region about the importance of businesses and institutions that you represent here today. We've also hosted public and business events with authors Bill McKibben and David Hess. We've held workshops and coordinated ad campaigns like Messages on Great Eastern Radio, a PSA on WNNE, as well as ads in the Valley News. And today, we're again assisted by CATV8 and their station manager, Angelina Tagliatella. She's recording this program for broadcast in the weeks ahead. And we're making an important connection this morning. Our guest speaker has worked hard to turn her dreams into reality, but she's not stopped there. From her time as a volunteer with Vista in the small, remote Alaskan Eskimo village of Chefornik, through to today, she's learned and she's shared her energies and ideas with people around the world. Our guest has worked with small farmers in Chiapas, Mexico, to her home state in Pennsylvania, founded the Sustainable Business Network of Greater Philadelphia, co-founded the International Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, which now includes some 30,000 independent business members in the US and Canada. And she is the recipient of nearly 50 local and national awards, including running a business recognized as one of America's 25 most generous companies. That company was Philadelphia's White Dog Cafe, a business born of her entrepreneurial spirit. That's a short list of what this woman has been up to. So it's a real honor that she's traveled here to speak with us. Please join me in welcoming Judy Wicks.
Thank you, Alan, for that introduction. It's just great to be here in this very vibrant regional community. I had a good night's sleep at the Norwich Inn last night, and I also had a delicious dinner there, and I signed books at the Norwich bookstore, and I will be signing books again at the back of the room today. So my talk is really based on my new book. It's a memoir, and it sort of explains the philosophical underpinnings of the localist movement. And I'll start by reading a section from the preface. Several years after I opened my restaurant, I hung a sign in my bedroom closet in my home above the White Dog Cafe, right where I would see it each morning. "Good morning, beautiful business," it read, reminding me daily of just how beautiful business can be when we put our creativity, care, and energy into producing a product or service that our community needs. I was just beginning my journey. I didn't know then what I do now, that when you connect head and heart in business, you can transform not just business as usual, but the economy in general. You can find a way to make economic exchange one of the most satisfying, meaningful, and loving of human interactions. The sign would stay there for the next 15 years and would often make me think of my own business and how the farmers were already out in the fields harvesting fresh organic fruits and vegetables to bring into the restaurant that day. I would think of Judy Dornstrike picking rose geraniums at Branch Creek Farm, and how she once told me that when she picked it, she would imagine our pastry chef, James Barrett, making rose geranium pound cake for our dessert menu. I would think of the farm animals out in the pastures, pigs, goats, chickens, enjoying each other's company in the warm morning sun and fresh air. And I would think of Dougie Newball, the goat herder, who claimed that when she kissed her goat's ears, it made their cheese better. Well, I'm sure that's true. Business, I learned, is about relationships. Money is simply a tool. What matters most are the relationships with everyone we buy from, sell to, and work with, and our relationship with Earth itself. My business was the way I expressed my love of life, and that's what made it a thing of beauty. This book is both a love story and a business book. It's about a love of life, nature, animals, community, and unique local culture, a love of good food and family farms, and a love of democracy, all being threatened by a global economic system driven by profit. It's also about a deep love of business and how we can embrace a way of doing business that is beautiful, that nurtures all that we cherish, and that furthers the creation of a whole new economic system based on caring relationships. So Alan mentioned my life living in an Eskimo village, and here's some pictures of that in Chefornik, Alaska. This woman is ice fishing in the villages on the bank of the river behind her. One of the traditions I learned in the Eskimo village is that when a man catches his first seal after a long, hard winter, his wife has a seal party, and she invites all the families to their house and divides the meat between the families. And then afterwards, anything that the family has accumulated during the year is given out to the other families. And in contemporary times, they also symbolize this sharing by tossing candy into the air. And here the women are catching the candy in their skirts. The Eskimos had no sense of accumulation or of envy. If you admire something that an Eskimo has, they'll take it off and give it to you. So you have to watch what you say about Eskimos. In our culture, it's just the opposite. Through advertising, envy is used to drive sales, so that we're envious of the models and need to buy makeup, or macho guys, we need to buy certain cigarettes or beers or whatever. In our society, we reward people who are greedy, and we actually admire the most, the ones who hoard the most, the ones that have the most cars and biggest houses and biggest wardrobes. That we're taught that we're suckers if we don't pay the lowest price and get the highest return on our investment without really thinking who are the losers. I'll read another passage. The Eskimos believed in the abundance of the universe, that there's enough for all if we are willing to share. As a society, the Eskimos, as I had first found them, are still the happiest people I've ever known. Showing such delight in the smallest things, they had a sense of their place in the world, in the web of life, based on who they were, not what they had. Their happiness and security did not depend on money and material possessions, but on community and their relationship with the land and knowledge of nature. Despite great hardships, there had been a joyfulness among the Eskimos, lost to so many of us, a delight in simply being alive on this beautiful planet. I learned from them that a sustainable economy could be based on sharing and cooperation rather than on competition and hoarding. So this is the little block, the 3400 block of Sansom Street in West Philadelphia, where I lived for 40 years and started my, my business there. And when I first walked down this little block of Victorian brownstone houses, I was very enchanted because it was like a little oasis in the middle of an institutional area where much of the old architecture had been torn down and replaced by strip malls and high-rise dormitories and office buildings. And in contrast, this lovely little block of 100-year-old houses with a few local businesses on the first floors were human scale and homey and inviting. So I was aghast to hear, after I had just moved into this block in 1972, that the block was going to be torn down to make way for a mall. And I just was so enraged that this beautiful architecture would be destroyed and the small businesses driven out and the residents and the community destroyed to make way for fast food restaurants and chain stores. So this must have been my first Bali moment back in 1972. So I joined the committee, the Sansom Committee, to help keep the buildings from being torn down. And during that time, I learned about Jane Jacobs and the urban activist who wrote Death and Life of Great American Cities. And Jacobs objected to the urban renewal plans during the 50s and 60s when vibrant urban neighborhoods were torn down to make way for high-rise office buildings that really separated the residences from the workplaces. I'll read a passage from Jane Jacobs. It was from reading Jane Jacobs, who loved her own neighborhood in New York City, as we love Sansom Street, that I learned the important concepts of mixed use and walkable communities, in which residents prospered from a lively mixture of residences and businesses, and could walk to stores and restaurants, to jobs and schools, to parks and theaters. This approach to designing cities and towns became known as the new urbanism, vitally important today as we struggle to reduce carbon emissions. Jacobs showed how residents were encouraged to leave the city for the sprawling suburbs, where housing developments and shopping malls were destroying rich farmlands for no more than what she scornfully called cheap parking. So here's a picture of a development kind of encroaching on farmland. And it was at this time, during the 60s, that there was an increase in the industrialization of agriculture, where farmers were forced off the land either by developments like this or by the corporate farmers, and where family farmers produced a diversity of fruits and vegetables that were meant for local consumption. Industrial agriculture planted thousands and thousands of acres in the same crop. This looks like a crop of, I'm not sure exactly what that is, but you'd see thousands and thousands of acres just planted in corn or wheat or soybeans. Animals, too, were taken off of pasture. And here's a picture of the battery cages where hens are crammed into these tiny little cages. Their whole lives are stuck in here in these, without being able to move, without fresh air and sunshine. In these animal factories, the manure is concentrated, so what usually is a resource, when manure is spread evenly out on the ground, it's a resource for farmers, but in these factory farms, it became a pollution problem. So without farms selling locally, consumers really lost access to fresh local food and lost their connection to the earth itself. Most Americans don't know who grows their food, who brews their beer, who bakes their bread, who makes their clothes, who builds their furniture and houses. We become disconnected and separated from each other and from our land and our places. It once was that the butchers, the bakers, the candlestick makers formed the foundation for strong communities. And many towns and cities have lost their unique identity as the streets are full of chain stores found everywhere, or left deserted as people go to the big box stores like Walmart's on the outside of town. And these stores are owned by distant corporations, selling goods produced far away in sweatshops and factory farms. Without these direct relationships, few of us think about the consequences of our economic transactions on other people and communities and on animals and nature. And when we shop at these big chain stores, our capital goes right out of our communities. I'm sure those of you who heard Michael Schumann speak would know about this, how when we shop at a local store, that capital stays and circulates within our own community, building community wealth. So eventually we won our fight to save our block from being torn down, and I started the White Dog Cafe on the first floor of my house on Sansom Street. So it was here that I chose to live and to raise my family, to start my business, and that's the first step in building a local living economy, is choosing a place to live, and taking responsibility for that place, for becoming knowledgeable of the neighborhood and the issues that that we face as a community. So I built the business from a muffin shop, and a lot of stories, 3 chapters in the book about the White Dog, but I'm going to keep moving along here. This is Carol Stout, a local brewer, and I want to read a passage about this. I finally got my liquor license, so I was finally able to begin serving the new American beers I was longing for. Customers were surprised when they came into the bar and ordered a popular beer like Heineken to be told that we didn't carry the brand. Then how about a Lowenbrau? Nope. Well, then I'll take a Michelob. Not that either. Then just give me a Bud. Sorry. But how about one of these beers? Handing over our beer list, money short at the time, the bartender explained that the White Dog carried only beers from small independent breweries, later called craft or microbrews, that brewed beer in small batches. I soon discovered that unlike wine, beer is best when fresh and without the preservatives needed for long-distance shipping, just like local food. So I upped the ante. Not only did I want flavor for all American beer, I became determined to have beer that was local, fresh, and made without preservatives. So I was thrilled to hear in 1987 that an excellent new brewery had opened just 60 miles to the west in Adamstown. It was not only the first new brewery in Pennsylvania since Prohibition, but it was owned by a woman. I immediately called up the owner, Carol Stout, and asked about ordering her beer. At first, Carol thought 60 miles was too far for her beer to travel. She was into local too. But I convinced her to sell to me, and she drove into town with a keg strapped into her passenger seat with the seatbelt. We laughed about that years later, when Carol was celebrating the 20th anniversary of Stout's Brewery after winning many a gold medal at the Great American Beer Festival. It wasn't long before Stout's began brewing our private label beer in 22-ounce bottles. I named it Leg Lifter Lager and designed a label featuring my drawing of a white dog lifting his leg on a red fire hydrant. So that's the label, Leg Lifter Lager, our local beer. So living and working in the same place, sort of like the family farm or the family inn, living above the shop in the old-fashioned way of doing business, I raised my family in the community where I did business. So living and working in the same community, I had the same values at home as at work, where oftentimes in business school, we're told, leave your values at home when you go to work. Here's my 2 kids that I raised in the restaurant. So at home, we teach our children the golden rule, but when we get to work, gold rules. So in many cases, industrialization has not only separated us from our places and from our land, but has also separated us from our deepest values. At the White Dog, there was a short distance between me as a business decision maker and those who were affected by my decisions. My employees, my customers, my neighbors, my community, my natural environment. So in this kind of situation, we're more likely to make decisions from the heart rather than simply by the head. For instance, when I heard about the idea of paying a living wage, which I actually heard about from Ben & Jerry's at a conference up here in Vermont, and that's the voluntary commitment by a business owner to pay what it actually costs to live in a community rather than the miserable minimum wage. And when I first heard about that, I thought, oh, well, I couldn't do that in the restaurant business. It would be too much money to pay the living wage, which was $8 back then. This was quite a while ago, to entry-level dishwashers. But one day when I was in the kitchen, 3 young men looked up to me who were doing prep work or washing dishes who made below $8 an hour. And all of a sudden the light bulb went off my head. And I thought to myself, my gosh, anyone that works at the White Dog 40 hours a week, of course I want them to be able to pay their rent and buy their food and their clothes. So then we instituted a living wage at the White Dog. And the same kind of thing happened with renewable energy. I had heard and understood in my head about climate change. We started having programs at the White Dog back in 1998 about climate change, and Pennsylvania was deregulated at the same time California was. And I knew that I could buy renewable energy if I wanted to, but I wasn't motivated to actually do it until I had to walk in the woods during a drought and saw the effect of the drought on the woods that I loved. And I felt the stress of the woods in my heart. I could feel the sense of fire, in the forest. Not even the birds were tweeting. And so I connected head and heart and went back to town, and White Dog became the first business in Pennsylvania to buy 100% of our electricity from renewable sources. The same kind of thing happened with my experience with inner city kids, and we started a mentoring program. In each of these examples, paying a living wage, signing up for renewable energy, and starting a mentoring program, I was motivated to make positive decisions by connecting with my heart. Having firsthand real-life experience with people and places in my own community helped me to do that. But it was not the only factor. After all, there are plenty of examples of acting locally with a closed heart, and on the other hand, making compassionate decisions that affect people and places far away. It's really about Carl Jung's observation: the longest journey we have to take is from the head to the heart. In the business world, that's often a difficult journey. So many messages tell us, don't be a softie. Success comes by keeping a stiff upper lip. This is a lesson boys are traditionally taught from a young age, and women adopt in order to compete successfully in business. As a child growing up in the 1950s, before the time when girls were directed towards careers outside the home, I had refused to participate in doll making, cooking, and sewing, which was meant to prepare girls for a life of service as mothers and wives. A life of service while the guys do all the cool stuff? No way. But now as an adult, I found myself embracing the feminine qualities I had once rejected, the qualities of the heart, actually making them part of my business philosophy and even my definition of the very purpose of business. So one of the challenges that I found in the business world was the paradigm of continual growth, that success is measured by continual material growth, both in the business world as well as in our personal lives. There's never enough, and businesses teach, grow or die. Yet we live on a finite planet. Continual material growth is literally destroying our home on Earth. And I would get these questions from people like, well, how many units do you have? Or do you have a chain of White Dogs? Why don't you open one in New York City? But I realized that if I were to grow a chain, I would lose what was most important to me. And that was the authentic and direct relationships that I had with my staff and my customers and my suppliers, my neighbors. So I made a conscious decision to remain a community-based business, deeply rooted in my community. So instead of starting another White Dog in someone else's community, I looked to see what business does my own community need. So instead of another White Dog, I started a Black Hat. So that was my retail store next door. And not only did we offer our customers a convenient place to buy responsible gifts that were either made locally or fair trade, or gifts that were made from recycled materials like bottle caps or old wires or whatever, but we also added more character and vitality to our block. A great example of this is Zingerman's Deli in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Paul Saginaw is a leader, is on the board of Bali, and I love his example. Instead of doing a chain of delis, a very popular deli in Ann Arbor, they looked to see what their community needed, and they started a creamery to make ice cream and butter. They started a bakery. They started a coffee roasting company. They started a candy company. They now have, I think, something like 10 or 12 businesses, and not only that, but in each of these companies, they partnered with an outstanding employee. So they created more owners, and that's another important part of this movement, is having more owners. Instead of doing a cookie cutter chain, all of us can ask ourselves, what business does our community need if we're an entrepreneur? Do we need more food processing businesses? Do we need to start making clothes locally? Do we need to have reclaimed wood dealers, green energy companies, and so on? So by our 10th anniversary in 1993, when we celebrated our success in growing to 200 seats, I realized that my business was as big as I wanted it to be. We had reached a financially viable size. So I stopped growing the White Dog physically and focused on growing it deeper, strengthening relationships with all those involved with the business. You might say that rather than making business decisions to maximize profits, I made decisions to maximize relationships. And in the long run, I believe this was also the reason for our financial sustainability. I had come to realize that we could measure our success in other ways than growing physically. We could grow by increasing our knowledge, expanding our consciousness, deepening our relationships, developing our creativity, building community, and enhancing our natural environment. All this while also increasing our own happiness and well-being and having more fun. So at the White Dog, we started all these programs to go deeper in our community with table talks at breakfast or at dinner, storytellings. This is a storytelling to give a voice to underrepresented groups. This was one on same-sex marriage with a gay couple and a lesbian couple. We did tours. This is a tour of a prison gardening program, inner city prize-winning gardens. Working with children, we'd go on a child watch tour to look at the lives of inner city children, affordable housing tour, many events throughout the year. This was a Martin Luther King annual dinner that we had for over 20 years, a Freedom Seder, an international trip where we went to different countries to learn how U.S. foreign policy affects the lives of others. This was in Vietnam. We called it A Table for 6 Billion, Please. A pajama party brunch on New Year's Day where everybody came in their pajamas, and this is a family who wore the same matching flannel pajamas, and every year they had a new set that the grandmother made, the McLean family. This was one of my favorite events on 4th of July, the Liberty and Justice for All Ball, and after we had a buffet of farm fresh products, we put on a little skit called Birth of a Nation. First came a Revolutionary War guy playing the drums. Then I came out as a pregnant colonial woman with my midwife. I had a sign on my back that says, George Washington slept here. She helped me into my bed, got the audience to say 1, 2, 3, push. So looking, and under the covers, I secretly pushed the beach ball down through a hole in the bottom of the bed. Out comes one twin. Here comes another twin. One's called Liberty, the other Justice. They hopped on the stage and did a tap dance to Yankee Doodle Dandy. Then we wheeled out the Statue of Liberty and lit our sparklers and sang God Bless America. So we don't have to go away to faraway places to have fun. We can create fun in our own neighborhood. And I think it's more fun to dance in the street with people that we know. My favorite times were looking around me while I was dancing in the street to see my family and employees, friends, and customers. Through our many educational programs and sustainable practices, I was engaged in all these alternative ways to grow at the White Dog Cafe and Black Cat, and in helping my customers as well as interested staff to grow with me. Financial sustainability was an important factor in serving all of our stakeholders, from suppliers to investors. But ultimately, we measured our success not simply by profits and continued material growth, but by the continued growth of happiness and well-being of our customers, employees, community, and natural world. I felt as though I had reinvented growth in a way that worked for me and worked for the planet and the people around me. So what the White Dog was known most for was buying from local farmers. And we did so for, starting in 1986, buying fresh fruits and vegetables organic from local farmers. I knew the importance of buying pastured chicken and uncaged eggs. But I had no idea about the confinement farming of pigs until I read John Robbins' book in the 1990s and learned about the barbaric way in which these mother sows are kept in these crates so they can't move forward or backwards or turn around their entire lives. They never feel a ray of sunshine. They never have a breath of fresh air. They stand over slats where the manure goes into a lagoon below them that then goes on to pollute the water and air and soil of the rural neighborhoods. I felt that this was a violation of nature to treat these mothers in this way. They're artificially inseminated. The babies are taken away prematurely, artificially inseminated again, as though they're pieces of machines in a factory. But yet they're mammals like us, like our dogs. And those of us who have dogs know that dogs do have feelings. All mammals have feelings. You can see those expressions on our dogs' faces of joy, of despair, of guilt if they steal a little sausage off the table. And here are these animals that are highly intelligent are kept in these cages and literally go crazy and gnaw on these bars and so on. So I realized that the pork that I was serving at the White Dog must come from this industrial factory farm system, as something like 95% of the pork in this country does. So I finally just went into the kitchen and said, take all the pork off the menu, the bacon, the ham, the pork chops, that we cannot be part of this, this terrible, cruel system. So we found a source for pastured pork. This is a big mother sow out in Amish country with her little babies in the nests. Here they are sleeping in pig pens as they like to do, and rolling in the mud. Then I found out about the plight of the cow, how cows are herbivores. They're supposed to eat grass, but because of the U.S. subsidies to the large corporate grain dealers, it's actually cheaper to take the cows off of pasture and feed them grain. And here's a stockyard where the animals stand and manure. I could go on and on about the plight of all these farm animals, but here's where we began getting our beef from Dr. Bill Elkins' Black Angus beef farm. And we had such great burgers and steaks from him that Patti LaBelle, famous Philadelphia singer, used to pull up on the sidewalk and run in to get a Buck Run burger. There's Dougie, and this is the one that kisses her goat's ears. So finally I said to myself, well, we've succeeded in having a menu that's cruelty-free. We've finally done it, and this is gonna be our market niche. No other restaurant in Philadelphia can make these claims, and this is our competitive advantage. This is all about us. Then my transformational moment came. I thought I had done what I needed to do for animals, but I saw that I was not finished. I had to go further, and I said to myself, Judy, if you really do care about those pigs and other farm animals that are treated so cruelly, and if you care about the small farmers who are being driven out of business by factory farms, if you care about the environment that's being polluted by the concentration of waste and unhealthy practices, if you care about the workers in these ghastly slaughterhouses and factories, if you care about the rural communities that are being destroyed, if you care about the consumers who eat meat that's full of antibiotics and hormones, then rather than keep this as your competitive advantage, you will, yes you will, share your knowledge with your competitors. Up until this point, I had always felt that my highest calling was to model socially responsible practices within my company, but it was no longer enough. After all, there is no such thing as one sustainable business, no matter how great our practices are. We can only be part of a sustainable system. I had to move from a competitive mentality to one of cooperation in order to build that system, an entire local food system based on the values I upheld. Building a new global economy, I came to realize, rested on a simple quality, our capacity to care, followed by our willingness to do what it is necessary to defend and nurture what it is that we truly care about. I had found the key I had been searching for that could bring real change to our economy. It was one I had known all along. Change begins in the heart of the entrepreneur, and for that matter, the heart of the consumer as well. It's the power of love and compassion that can bring transformational change. So once I made this decision to cooperate and to share, it changed my life, and I look for other ways to continue to share, to build the economy that I knew I wanted. So I started a nonprofit, White Dog Community Enterprises, and began putting 20% of the profits from my cafe into my nonprofit. I asked the farmer, this is Farmer Glenn with me, this is at the Dance of the Ripe Tomatoes that we have every fall to celebrate local agriculture. But Glenn was bringing us in 2 pigs a week that were pasture raised. And so I asked him, would you like to expand your business? And he said yes. And I said, well, what's holding you back? And he said he needed $30,000 to buy a refrigerated truck so that he could deliver to the other restaurants in town. So I loaned him the $30,000 and he bought the truck. And I started the Fair Food Project as our first project of White Dog Community Enterprises. And it was the job of our executive director to go around to the other restaurants in town to tell them about buying from farmers. And we published a booklet that listed all the farms that the White Dog bought from, with the phone number and what each farm sold. So meanwhile, through my sister restaurant project, where we went around to different countries to learn, I started to understand more about what was going on in the global economy and wanted to understand more. And the most important experience I had in the many countries I went to was in Chiapas, Mexico. And I really wanted to find out why did the Zapatistas have their revolution on the day that NAFTA went into effect, January 1st, 1994. I was curious to know, and ended up going down there for 10 years. This is a picture of the Zapatistas signing our papers to get into the autonomous zone. In the beginning, I started bringing customers down to understand about the uprising. It was basically a nonviolent revolution against the Mexican army by the Zapatistas. And the reason that they did it on the day that NAFTA went into effect is that they could see the handwriting on the wall that U.S. Corporate farmers whose corn was subsidized by our tax dollars were going to dump cheap corn into Mexico and put them out of business. And that's exactly what has happened, including dumping GMO corn, which is polluting the native varieties where corn originated, in Mexico. So the Zapatistas demanded that they have the right for local self-reliance, the right to grow their own crops and not be forced into the global economy to work on plantations and in factories. So they demanded the right to maintain their own culture, to teach their children in their own schools in their own languages, and not be pulled into the corporate global monoculture. They wanted their women to make their clothing there, their colorful traditional outfits, and not be forced to work in maquiladoras to make cheap clothing for the United States. So I saw in my trips to Chiapas that the loss of land was augmented by the Mexican army and the paramilitary forces that were violently moving people off their lands, destroying cooperatives and crops to force people off the land and into the factories to be part of the global economy. While in Chiapas, I suddenly realized the connection between what was happening to the farmers in Mexico and what was happening to the farmers in Pennsylvania. And I'll read you a passage here. I came to the realization that the call of the Zapatistas for economic self-reliance and a connection to the land was the same call of the small farmers in my own country. In Chiapas, the powerful were using violence to force people off their land where they could have been self-reliant. But the same thing was happening at home, not with government-supplied guns, but with government-supplied policies, such as the Farm Bill, which served the interest of large corporations over locally owned farms and businesses. As in Mexico, family farms were being lost in rural communities at home, and many of the former farm owners were now workers on corporate factory farms, or driven from their communities altogether. Life in rural America was being destroyed. It was all part of the same global struggle. The Zapatistas' call for independence and local self-reliance was the call of threatened communities everywhere. So I formed a delegation of American business people that went down there, first of all, to witness the violence to our indigenous trading partners, like the companies that bought coffee from Mexico and companies that bought textiles from Mexico. But we decided to do a project to help this particular co-op, Moot-Viets, to export coffee to the United States and Europe, and also to develop domestic sales so they wouldn't be dependent on exports. So I pre-financed the first container of coffee. I put in $20,000 and my friend put in $20,000 so that they had the money to pay the growers for the coffee. And gradually they went up to 15 containers that they shipped to Europe and the United States. Some might think that such a small coffee enterprise could not be significant, but the idea of connecting many small businesses together can become a powerful force. A group of business leaders had connected a network of communities working for self-reliance in the highlands of Chiapas with our network of small businesses building local self-reliance across the United States. It is this alignment of values, this connection of multiple networks of small producers and businesses that has the power to change the world. From my experiences in Chiapas and with the small farmers at home, I began to envision an alternative to the corporate-based global economy, an economic system that was locally self-reliant in basic needs and interconnected globally by an intricate network of small-scale business relationships that were win-win. So 2 events happened in the fall of 1999 that compelled me to work nationally to do small scale on a large scale and spreading this localization movement across the country. The first event was the Battle of Seattle against the WTO, and I saw all these people, the environmentalists, the students, the professors, the labor unions, and so on, that were opposing corporate globalization, but there was no positive image. There was no positive alternative being put forward. So I thought, how can we turn the energy of these young people that were protesting into building something new? And then actually, literally days later, I heard that Ben & Jerry's was going to be sold to a multinational conglomerate. Ben & Jerry's had always been a leader in our community of socially responsible businesses, and so I literally sat up in bed in the middle of the night and thought, my God, they've got Ben & Jerry's. And then I saw that other companies, O'Dwell's sold Coca-Cola, Honest Tea to Coca-Cola, Stonyfield to Groupe de Monde, the makers of Dannon Yogurt, The Body Shop to L'Oreal, Thomas & Maine, to Colgate, Palmolive, that even within these socially responsible companies, the old paradigm of measuring success by continual growth was continuing. And at the same time, our movement for responsible business was neglecting the issues of human scale, the issue of place, and the issue of ownership, that we need to have more owners, not be consolidating into fewer and fewer owners, but having more owners to decentralize ownership, decentralize wealth, and decentralizes power, economic as well as political power. So that's why in the fall of 2001, I founded BALI, the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, to connect local leaders, to spread best practices between the different communities, and to drive capital towards local economies. And here's a group, this was at the BALI conference last year in Grand Rapids, and this was the group of business people that won the back of the napkin business contest. And they're very happy about that. We do this every year at the conference. The next conference, this will be our, I think, our 11th annual, or is it our 12th, will be in Buffalo, so a little closer to you all in June. I hope some of you will come. So at BALI, rather than measuring successes, the old paradigm is successes measured by continual growth, but our new paradigm is successes measured by the health and well-being of our communities and our natural world. And here's my local network, like your Local First Alliance is a member of BALI. In Philadelphia, I started the Sustainable Business Network. And it was when I first started, I thought, well, how in the world do you actually start a local living economy? And I had worked to build a local food system. And then I thought, well, what else is in a local economy besides local food? Well, there's renewable energy, there's locally designed and made clothing, there's community capital, we need local banks and credit unions and so on. We need green building businesses, we need local arts and culture, we need independent retail, independent media. And so I call these the building blocks of a local living economy. And what we did, we started off by having each of the building blocks educate the others. So, one time the food people would talk about, this is the state of local food in our community, and here's what you can do to get involved. Then the next time we would have renewable energy. Okay, here's the different ways that you can buy renewable energy in our community. And then the clothing people would go, and so on. And each time I would say, how many in the room bought from another business that's locally owned? And I'm going to ask you right now, how many of you buy from local businesses in your business? If you want to raise your hand. That's great. So that's really the heart and soul of beginning to build a local living economy, is having the businesses begin buying from each other and then going out from there. And here's a picture of one of our founding meetings for the Sustainable Business Network in the Wiki Wacky Woods, I call up in the Poconos. And we found real collective joy in working together toward a shared vision, for our community and for our local economy. And I'll just end by reading one last passage. As I see it, greed and violence often come from a lack of faith. Faith, as I saw in the Eskimo village, that the universe is abundant and can provide for everyone if we're willing to share, cooperate, and live in harmony with all of life. In working towards such a world, local living economies are shifting consciousness by modeling these values and demonstrating that our real security, as well as our happiness, lies in strong, self-reliant communities within a healthy web of life. By building a new global economy in which every community has food and water security and locally produced renewable energy, we are creating the foundation for world peace. That's the website for BALI, bealocalist.org. So I'll stop there and ask for questions. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Well, I feel that I'm now 66 years old, and I'm not going to actually start any more businesses myself. So I'm seeking my role as an elder in my community. And what I'm drawn to most is helping the next generation start beautiful businesses. So I begin to do some mentoring at home with a few young people, and I'd like to continue that. For the next year, I'm going to be on the road spreading the word about local economies and peddling my book. That's where I think I'll go, and I have some ideas of different types of businesses that we need in our local economy in Philadelphia, and I'd like to help young people start those kinds of businesses.
We have time for another question or two. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi, my name is Jake Guest. My wife and I run Killdeer Farm and Farm Stand in Norwich. We hire quite a few people locally, and we do business all we can with local businesses. Like Danowitz is a local general store, and I try to buy from them. It's a family-owned store. I try to do business with other local businesses, and I make a point of doing that even if there's a price differential. The problem I see, even some of the people that work for me, when I ask them where they shop, I mean, I usually shop at the co-op. Ask them where they shop, you know, it's Price Chopper and Walmart, and you know, to get into the politics of what that is dicey, especially I'm their boss, you know, but it's very upsetting to me. And it's really hard to figure out how to break through this this need that people feel, especially people of more modest income, to, you know, to go where it's cheap. You know, they go to Sam's Club, they go to Walmart, they go to those places, and really they don't want to hear about buy local, whatever.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and I think that is our largest challenge, and it's really a philosophical shift. And I think it has to do with how much is enough, because I think that even among low-income people, they buy more than they need. And I think we need to enlighten people about the importance of buying less. You can still spend the same amount of money if you buy less and put what you are spending into buying goods that are will last longer. The stuff they sell at Walmart, it falls apart immediately. I mean, even if people go to the thrift store, and that's one of the things I've been promoting when it comes to clothing, rather than buying cheap clothes from Walmart, go to the thrift store. The thrift stores have such wonderful, well-made clothing. And that is becoming the trend in the next generation for sure. People in my daughter and son's ages, like in their 20s and 30s, pride themselves in buying from the thrift stores. If there's young people here, they'll probably tell you that. I think that's one good alternative from Walmart when it comes to clothing, is to buy used clothing. And we have a glut of that in the United States, so much that a lot of our used clothing is actually shipped to other countries because we have so much, because we buy too much. So I think it's, you know, and I think it's also about really teaching people that the low cost of Walmart, someone is paying for the low cost of Walmart. It's the workers there who are underpaid. It's the sweatshops that those clothes and other goods come from. It's the animals from the factory farms. It's the environment that's paying. But I agree with you, it's a big leap. I hope more people read my book. That might enlighten people. Give the book as gifts to employees or whatever. And you know, I feel like that my book, you know, reaches people in their hearts, and also it's also very funny. So it's an easy read and an easy way to try and educate people through the book. I'm not just trying to sell books. I'm trying to sell my ideas. I'm trying to spread my ideas around. But
I think we have time for one more.
Hi, I'm Marta Ceroni from the Donella Meadows Institute. We're based in Norwich locally. And as we start having an impact around this region and we start developing our programs, we are going to focus on strengthening local economies, and especially the Upper Valley and Vermont. What you provided today is a wonderful vision. So I see great value in the pictures, in the experience that you shared with us, because sometimes what I see missing is a vision, something that you want to see happen. And you also gave a vision of a different model of growth that comes from the emergence of a lot of different initiatives and the social capital that is built in the communities. What do you see as the largest challenge in promoting this model of growth, this vision essentially, in the new generations of entrepreneurs? What are the missing building blocks that as NGOs who want to help local economies develop, we would need to focus on based on your experience?
Well, one of the challenges is capital. And unfortunately, most people, even enlightened people, invest their money in the stock market. And that's perpetuating the old economy, the industrial economy that's exploitive and extractive and so on. So we need to encourage people to invest locally in local banks, credit unions. In my case, I inherited stock from my parents. And in 1999, when my mother passed away, I sold off the stock and invested every penny in the reinvestment fund in Philadelphia. And that money is used to build wind turbines and invest in local businesses and so on. So I coined it, when I found out that they actually capitalized the wind turbines that brought the renewable energy, to my home and business, I coined the term getting a living return. When we invest locally, we not only get a financial return, but we get a living return of living in a more healthy, sustainable community and economy. So I think that that's a big thing, to try and get people to invest locally. A lot of communities don't have local banks or local credit unions or some sort of a reinvestment vehicle, but those things have to be started, and more this is going on, and that's a big part of Bali. And at our conference, we have a whole day of community capital about how different communities are forming experimenting with new forms of local capital, just even starting a club. So slow money is a big part of this too, where people get together who want to invest, say, $20,000 into a local business, and so they form kind of a club, and they have entrepreneurs come and present to them, and then they invest individually rather than going through a bank or a credit union. So there's a lot of models of this that are going on across the country. I'm not an expert in this part of it, but I'd say that's one of the most important things we need to do, is to make capital available to these entrepreneurs. Well, the answer to that question probably lies in this room, because people in the community need to provide that. We have a local banker here. He might have some ideas.
We'll talk, Peg. And I never thought of you as an older person. I think we all need to give Judy another round of applause.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for joining us this morning, and thanks again, especially to Judy. We really appreciate you coming here, talking with us, and I'm sure you are going to, your talk today will lead to a lot of really interesting conversations. Gary, thanks for that introduction. I'm Mary Margaret Sloan. I'm the Executive Director of Vital Communities, and just really briefly, last spring we asked Upper Valley residents, what's most important to you? And they responded, a vibrant local economy. We want to preserve our local economy. We want to keep money in our communities. We want to preserve the feel of small towns and cities. And we want to provide economic opportunities for our children and our grandchildren in the Upper Valley. And that's what Local First Alliance is all about. As with all of Vital Communities programs, we listen. So please fill out the survey that's at your place at the table. Let us know what you think about this event, about what we can do to provide future conversations about local economy. Please stop by the Local First Alliance booth on your way out and become a member. For those of you who join at the $500 level up, we'll provide you with one of Judy's books, a free book. And if you join today, or you renew, or you get someone else, another business to join or renew, you'll be entered into a raffle to be upgraded one level. So if you join at the $100 level, you'll be in a raffle to be bumped up to the $500 level and get the benefits at that level. So, oh, and lastly, if you'd like to purchase Judy's book, you can buy them at the back table. Norwich Bookstore, which was one of the founding members of Local First Alliance. You can purchase them back there. Again, thank you, Judy. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Mascoma Savings Banks and the Co-op for underwriting this event. And thank you all for joining us today.